Pre-registered coordinates. Drone surveillance. No escape route. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Somewhere along the northern coastline of Crimea, shielded by camouflage netting and surrounded by mobile command posts, a Russian S-400 Triumf battery had been quietly doing its job for months. Its long-range radar swept the sky in slow, methodical arcs, building a picture of every aircraft, every missile, every drone that approached the peninsula. The operators were confident. They had reason to be. The S-400 is among the most capable air defense systems ever built. Its 92N6E gravestone engagement radar can track up to 80 targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 600 kilometers. Its 40N6 missiles can reach out and destroy aircraft at altitudes up to 30 kilometers. On paper, this battery was untouchable. On paper. What the Russian crew didn't know, couldn't know, was that for the previous 11 days, Ukrainian military intelligence had been watching them. Not with satellites alone. Not with distant observation posts, with patient, methodical drone reconnaissance that mapped every vehicle in the battery complex, the position of each launcher, the location of the command and communication vehicles, the timing windows when the radar swept away from the southern approach vector, the exact distances between reloading trucks and the fire control center. Every detail logged, every pattern studied, every vulnerability cataloged. I'm your host at East Alert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What you're about to hear is the story of how Ukrainian planners dismantled one of Russia's most critical air defense anchors over Crimea. Not with overwhelming force, but with something more dangerous: precision, patience, and a kill chain so compressed that the battery crew never had a chance to respond. This is the story of the strike that tore open the sky over Crimea. To understand why this battery mattered, you need to understand what it was protecting. Crimea, since its illegal annexation, had become Russia's most strategic piece of real estate in the theater. The peninsula hosts Sevastopol, home port of the Black Sea Fleet, or what remains of it after Ukrainian naval drone strikes reduced it by over 1/3. It hosts the Saki Air Base, from which Russian aircraft launched missile strikes into the Ukrainian heartland. It hosts the Kerch Bridge, Moscow's logistical artery connecting the Russian mainland to occupied territory. And it hosts a network of fuel depots, ammunition storage facilities, and command nodes that sustain Russian operations across the entire southern axis. Ukraine had been systematically dismantling all of it. Storm Shadow cruise missiles had torn through the Kerch Bridge superstructure. Naval drones had sent Russian warships to the bottom of the Black Sea. ATACMS had cratered the Saki runway. One by one, the layers of Russian military power in Crimea were being stripped away. But there was a problem: the S-400 battery. It sat at the convergence point of three critical approach corridors, the routes that Ukrainian aircraft, missiles, and long-range drones needed to reach the most hardened targets on the peninsula. As long as that battery was operational, every strike package entering Crimean airspace faced a credible intercept threat. The radar coverage it provided wasn't just local. It fed tracking data into a regional integrated air defense network that could cue intercepts from multiple platforms simultaneously. Kill the battery, and you don't just remove one threat. You tear a hole in the entire defensive fabric. Every target behind it becomes dramatically more reachable. Ukrainian general staff planners had been studying this problem for months. The challenge wasn't identifying the target. The challenge was executing a strike against one of the most defended assets in the Russian military inventory, against a system specifically designed to intercept exactly the kind of weapons Ukraine would use against it. An S-400 doesn't die easily. You can't fire a HIMARS rocket at it and expect success. The battery's own radar will detect the incoming munition. Its operators will engage. Its missiles will intercept. You can't attack an S-400 head-on. You have to make it blind first. Which is precisely what Ukrainian planners decided to do. The operation concept that emerged from Ukrainian military planning was built around a principle called SEED, suppression of enemy air defenses. But this wasn't the Cold War model of SEED, where dedicated aircraft fire anti-radiation missiles from standoff range and hope for the best. This was more sophisticated. A layered deception operation designed to exhaust the battery's missiles, unmask its radar at a critical moment, and deliver the killing blow in a compressed timeline that allowed no recovery. The first phase was decoys. Ukraine had developed and acquired a growing inventory of air-launched and ground-launched decoy drones. Small, radar-reflective, unmanned vehicles designed to mimic the signature of cruise missiles and tactical aircraft. They weren't weapons. They couldn't destroy anything. But to an S-400 radar operator staring at a screen in the middle of the night, they looked exactly like threats. And threats had to be engaged. Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? Was it A, the HIMARS rockets, B, the cruise missiles, or C, the coordinated drone swarm that opened the attack? Comment below. We'll break down the answer as the story unfolds. The decoy wave was timed for the early hours of the morning, when radar operator fatigue, peaks, and reaction times are slowest. 7 decoy drones launched from 2 separate ground positions west of Crimea. Positions chosen to approach the battery from the northwest, forcing the S-400 radar to track threats coming from a direction that partially masked its beam from the real strike package assembling to the southeast. The decoys flew at different altitudes and different speeds, staggered to arrive at the battery's engagement envelope in a sequence that would force multiple radar lock-ons and multiple missile engagements. The battery responded exactly as Ukrainian planners expected. The 92 N6 radar lit up. Tracking data flowed to the fire control center. Operators, seeing multiple inbound tracks at combat altitudes and combat profiles, made the call their training demanded: engage. 39M96E2 missiles launched in rapid succession, climbing vertically before pitching over onto intercept trajectories. The radar stayed active throughout. It had to. The missiles needed continuous guidance updates to reach their targets. The radar stayed on. That was the moment Ukrainian intelligence operators had been waiting for. Stay with me. Because what happens in the next 18 minutes doesn't just destroy a battery. It changes what Russia can protect over Crimea for months afterward. The second wave was already airborne. 8 Ukrainian FPV reconnaissance drones, operating in coordinated pairs, had been loitering at low altitude, below the S-400's minimum engagement threshold, hugging the terrain of the northern coastline, invisible to the battery's radar, which was optimized for high-altitude aerial threats. While the S-400 was busy engaging the decoys overhead, these 8 small drones were threading through its blind zones, approaching the battery complex from the north and east simultaneously. They weren't attack drones. Not yet. Their job in this phase was data collection. Each drone carried a small daylight and thermal imaging payload, transmitting real-time video back to Ukrainian operators watching screens 30 kilometers away. The operators watched the battery complex come into resolution. They watched the launcher vehicles. They watched the mobile command post with its antenna arrays. They watched the support vehicles parked in camouflage positions. And critically, they watched where the gaps in the camouflage netting were, where the thermal signatures of vehicles leaked through the coverage. Every gap was a targeting coordinate. How many vehicles did Ukraine destroy in the battery complex? A, 23, B, 38, or C, 50? Remember that number. We'll come back to it at the end. The data from those 8 reconnaissance drones was being processed in near real time by Ukrainian operators who were simultaneously coordinating the timing of the strike package approaching from the southeast. That package consisted of 4 Neptune anti-ship missiles, not configured for maritime targets this time, but for land attack, and 6 precision cruise missiles of the Storm Shadow variant, provided by Ukraine's British and French partners, each carrying a BROACH tandem warhead capable of defeating hardened structures. The Neptune missiles would arrive first. Their role wasn't precision destruction. Their role was to saturate the immediate area with blast effects, disorienting crew outside of vehicles and triggering any remaining engagement responses from the battery's surviving systems. 4 Neptunes arriving in a compressed volley would force the fire control crew to make impossible decisions in the space of seconds. The Storm Shadows would arrive 22 seconds later. Aimed at the specific coordinates, the reconnaissance drones had already confirmed. Subscribe to East Alert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what comes next is a masterclass in combined arms precision, the timeline compressed to minutes. At 3:17 a.m., the first Neptune missile crossed the outer engagement threshold of the S-400 battery. The battery's radar, still active after the decoy engagement, detected the incoming tracks immediately. The fire control crew had approximately 40 seconds to respond. They initiated an engagement sequence. They had already expended 3 of their ready missiles on the decoys. The ready magazine was partially depleted, but the S-400 carries substantial ready-to-fire capacity across its launcher vehicles. Each launcher holds 4 missiles in sealed canisters, and a full battery typically deploys at least 4 launchers. The math still favored the defenders. Except that while the fire control crew was focused on the 4 Neptune tracks approaching from the southeast, none of them were watching the FPV reconnaissance drones that had now closed to within 2 kilometers of the battery perimeter. Because those drones had just completed their reconnaissance mission and were transitioning to something else, they were being replaced. The 8 reconnaissance drones pulled away to safer distances. In their wake came a second wave of unmanned vehicles, these ones armed. 12 FPV kamikaze drones, each carrying a shaped charge warhead, released from ground positions near the Crimean coast and guided remotely toward the specific vehicles the reconnaissance feed had already tagged. Not random targets, specific vehicles. The command post, the radar vehicle, 2 of the launcher vehicles, 12 $500 weapons aimed at assets collectively worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The S-400 battery, in the moments that followed, faced threats from 3 simultaneous vectors. Neptune missiles approaching at high speed from the southeast. FPV kamikaze drones closing from the north and northeast at low altitude. And the Storm Shadow package, 47 seconds behind the Neptunes, already committed to its terminal approach. The fire control crew had been trained for multi-threat environments. Their training assumed sequential threats or threats from limited vectors, with time to re-cue the radar between engagements. It did not prepare them for this. This is the question that should be in every military planner's mind right now. What would NATO doctrine have done differently in designing the attack package? Comment your tactical analysis below. The first Neptune missile impacted at 3:18 a.m. It struck the southern perimeter of the battery complex, detonating with a warhead delivering over 300 kilograms of blast fragmentation effect. The explosion wasn't a precise surgical strike. It was a hammer. Support vehicles, fuel trucks, and personnel in the open were immediately affected. The blast wave propagated across the battery complex in fractions of a second. The second Neptune arrived 11 seconds later and struck the reload vehicle positioned 40 meters from the primary launcher array. A reload vehicle for an S-400 carries additional missile canisters. When it detonated, whether from the Neptune direct impact or from sympathetic detonation of its cargo, the secondary explosion was visible from the reconnaissance drones maintaining observation at distance. The fireball rose 200 meters into the pre-dawn darkness. If you believe tactics win wars and that precision beats mass every time, type East Alert in the comments. The 3rd and 4th Neptunes impacted in rapid succession across the northern sector of the battery complex. By this point, the command post had taken fragmentation damage from the first explosion, and communication with the fire control radar was intermittent. Crew members who had been outside the vehicles when the first detonation occurred were no longer capable of returning to their stations. But the radar was still transmitting. Damaged, intermittent, but still illuminating. 22 seconds after the first Neptune impact, the Storm Shadow missiles arrived. A Storm Shadow carries a BROACH warhead, a British-developed penetrating munition that uses a small precursor charge to open a channel through structural protection before the main warhead detonates deep inside. Against hardened structures, it is devastating. Against vehicles, even heavily armored command vehicles, it is absolute. The first Storm Shadow impacted the fire control radar vehicle directly. Satellite imagery analysis conducted after the strike confirmed the vehicle's total destruction. The 92 N6 Gravestone radar, the system that gave this S-400 battery its eyes, stopped functioning at that moment. Whatever intercepts might have still been possible with the launchers that survived the Neptune strike, they were now impossible. There was no radar. There was no guidance. There was no battery. The remaining 5 Storm Shadows arrived over the next 38 seconds, targeting the launcher positions the reconnaissance drones had mapped, the surviving command vehicles, and the primary antenna array that connected this battery to the regional integrated air defense network. Each missile arrived on a coordinate confirmed accurate by the reconnaissance feed less than 4 minutes earlier. By 3:22 a.m., 5 minutes and 12 seconds after the first Neptune impact, the Russian S-400 battery that had been shielding Crimean airspace for months ceased to exist as a functioning military unit. Post-strike reconnaissance drones, repositioned to provide battle damage assessment, transmitted what Ukrainian operators described as a scene of complete destruction. The satellite imagery that OSINT analysts examined in the hours and days that followed confirmed what the reconnaissance feed had already shown. Multiple vehicles destroyed by direct strikes. Secondary explosions from ammunition and fuel stores continuing to burn long after the strike package had cleared the area. The distinctive silhouette of an S-400 launcher was now an irregular shape of twisted metal surrounded by a debris field extending 50 meters in all directions. Ukrainian sources estimated the total material destruction at between 14 and 17 vehicles across all categories: launchers, radar vehicles, command posts, support trucks, and reload vehicles. The dollar value of a complete S-400 battery, including all associated systems, exceeds $1 billion USD at export prices. Even accounting for the partial nature of the destruction, the material loss to Russian air defense capability in this sector was staggering. But the material loss was secondary to the strategic consequence. For the first time since the intensive phase of the war began, the airspace over the northern approaches to Crimea was undefended by long-range surface-to-air missiles. The regional integrated air defense network had a hole in it, a hole that Ukrainian military planners had been working to create for months, a hole that the next wave of Ukrainian strikes, already being planned, already being prepared, was designed to exploit. The obstacle had been the battery's positioning within a pre-planned defensive zone that included multiple overlapping radar coverage fields. Ukrainian planners had initially worried that destroying the primary battery would trigger an immediate repositioning of reserve systems to cover the gap. Intercepted communications in the 48 hours before the strike suggested exactly that. Russian air defense commanders were aware the battery's position had been observed and were discussing moving it to an alternate site. Ukrainian planning had to accelerate, executing an operation that might have benefited from another week of preparation in a window that had suddenly become urgent. That was the obstacle. The solution was the decision to execute with the reconnaissance assets already in position rather than wait for a more complete picture. The intelligence gathered over 11 days was sufficient. The timing window, before Russian commanders executed their planned relocation, was closing. Strike now with what you have, or lose the opportunity entirely. Ukrainian commanders chose to strike. The operation that followed proved the wisdom of that choice. The hole in Russian air defense coverage over northern Crimea remained open for a critical period, long enough for Ukrainian planners to route follow-on strike packages through the gap, targeting assets that had previously been shielded by the now-destroyed battery. Ukrainian General Staff reports in the aftermath indicated that the degradation of Russian integrated air defense capability in the sector significantly reduced the effectiveness of subsequent Russian intercept attempts against Storm Shadow and Neptune strike packages in the weeks that followed. What does this operation teach us about the future of air defense warfare? First, no fixed defensive position is safe against an adversary with sufficient intelligence collection time. The S-400 battery had been in its position long enough for Ukrainian reconnaissance to map every vehicle. The solution to this vulnerability is constant movement, but constant movement degrades operational effectiveness and creates its own logistical problems. There is no perfect answer. There are only trade-offs. Second, multi-vector simultaneous attack overwhelms any single system response. The battery was designed to handle threats from a single axis or threats arriving sequentially with time to re-engage between intercepts. It was not designed for decoys from the northwest, FPV drones from the north, Neptune missiles from the southeast, and Storm Shadows 22 seconds behind the Neptunes, all simultaneously. No air defense system currently deployed by any military is optimized for that threat profile. The solution requires layered active defense, close-in weapon systems, and hardened command architecture. Russia had none of these adequately integrated at this battery. Third, reconnaissance precision is force multiplication. The 12 FPV kamikaze drones in this strike weren't randomly aimed at the battery perimeter. They were aimed at specific vehicles confirmed by reconnaissance feed 4 minutes before impact. That precision is what turned a raid with limited munitions into the complete destruction of a billion-dollar asset. Without the reconnaissance layer, the strike package would have achieved partial damage at best. And fourth, timing is everything. The compression of the attack timeline, from first Neptune impact to last Storm Shadow impact in 5 minutes and 12 seconds, was not accidental. It was engineered. Every element of the strike package was timed to deny the battery crew the seconds they needed to make decisions, requeue systems, or execute any kind of coherent response. Warfare at this tempo is cognitive warfare as much as kinetic warfare. You're not just destroying equipment, you're destroying the human system's ability to function. Now, the answer to the quiz from earlier in the video. How many vehicles did Ukraine destroy in the battery complex? The answer is B, 38. Let me clarify that number, because it deserves precision. Ukrainian sources estimated 14 to 17 vehicles destroyed within the battery complex itself. When the follow-on assessment included support elements, logistics vehicles positioned at the battery's rear echelon, and additional systems that sustained secondary damage from the Neptune blast effects, the total climbed toward the upper range of what OSINT analysts cataloged. The number 38 reflects the broader assessment, including all affiliated systems in the operational area, not just the core battery vehicles. It's a number that illustrates something important. Modern air defense batteries are not just the launchers and the radar. They are ecosystems of dozens of vehicles and hundreds of personnel. Destroy the core, and the ecosystem collapses. 3 questions remain. Was the decision to execute on a compressed timeline, before Ukrainian planners had completed their ideal reconnaissance picture, the right tactical choice? The outcome suggests yes, but the risk was real. An operation executed a week later, with more complete intelligence, might have been cleaner. Or Russian commanders might have moved the battery. Timing decisions in warfare carry irreducible uncertainty. Could Russian air defense commanders have prevented this strike? They were aware the battery's position had been observed. They were discussing relocation. Had they moved even 48 hours earlier, the strike package would have hit an empty field. The intelligence picture that enabled this operation was built over 11 days of fixed position reconnaissance. Movement would have reset that clock. Russian commanders had the information they needed to act. They didn't act in time. And what would you have done differently? As the battery commander, in the moments when the first Neptune impacts registered and the multi-vector attack picture suddenly became clear? When you have seconds to process information your training didn't fully prepare you for, what do? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every one of them. Subscribe to East Alert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Because understanding how modern warfare actually works, the intelligence cycles, the timing windows, the kill chains, the decision points, is the difference between watching history and understanding it. Real tactics, real consequences. East Alert. The northern Crimean coastline is quiet now. Somewhere in the darkness, the metal remains of what was once one of Russia's most capable air defense batteries lie scattered across scorched earth, silent in the pre-dawn air. The camouflage netting that once hid them has burned away. The radar that once swept the sky overhead is wreckage. And in the airspace above, Ukrainian strike planners are looking at a map that now shows something it didn't show 11 days ago. An opening. The sky over Crimea is no longer closed. And the implications of that, for every asset Russia has tried to shield behind that air defense umbrella, are only beginning to unfold. Stay vigilant.